Hey guys, tonight we're wandering down a dim Roman alley, your sandals slapping against the ancient stone. The scent of oil lamps and roasting chickpeas hangs low in the night air. You turn a corner, glance upward, and see a flickering glow. That's not coming from a torch. A line of smoke curls into the starless sky. Someone yells in Latin. Somewhere a dog barks. Then crackling, louder, faster. The dry timber frame above your head is catching. And unless someone acts quickly, this whole block might disappear before sunrise. Welcome to Rome, where the bricks are cheap, the buildings are tall, and fire doesn't knock, it kicks the door in. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself living on the third floor of a 5-story insula, a Roman apartment block made of questionable stone, splintery wood, and prayer. It's barely wide enough to stretch your arms in both directions, and the walls thin enough to hear your neighbor sneeze, or worse, practice his flute. There's no running water up here, so you haul your own bucket up daily. The kitchen is more of a hearth than a room, and ventilation is aspiratio. And yet it's home. That is, until the fire comes. Fires are the city's most feared nuisance. They come often. Rome is dense, noisy, combustible. Open flames are used for cooking, heating, lighting, rituals, and probably drying socks. And the streets? A chaotic spaghetti of alleys too narrow for even a goat to turn around in. If a fire starts, there's almost no way for it to stay small. Historians still argue whether early Roman fire prevention was non-existent or just laughably naive. Either way, you're not sleeping soundly tonight. The fear of fire isn't new. As far back as the 5th century BCE, when Rome was still more village than empire. Records mention whole districts razed by what they politely called accidental combustion. Of course, when half your walls are woven reeds and the rest is old thatch, a stray spark isn't just a problem, it's a prophecy fulfilled. Now, there was a kind of fire response back then. Imagine it. A ragged line of slaves or low-ranking workers frantically passing jugs of water from a public well to a smoking rooftop, yelling at each other in half a dozen dialects, no uniforms, no plan. It's just pure panic, and you, upstairs in your wooden-walled flat, are left with a few options. Yell Ignis at the top of your lungs, toss your water bucket at the flames, or begin negotiating with the gods. That's the terrifying thing. Rome has no professional firefighters yet. Not in any organized, reliable way. Your fate lies in who happens to be nearby and how much they like you. And if you think your landlord's going to pay for a new roof, you probably won't survive this century with any savings. Oh, and here's a little-known quirk. Some apartment owners intentionally let their buildings burn. Yep, Arsans insurance was a thing especially before insurance even technically existed. Land was valuable. Reconstruction often came with incentives. And let's be honest, if your building collapsed under natural causes, you could always blame the gods and start fresh. Meanwhile, for the average Roman like you, the best case scenario is that the fire skips your block this time. Worst case, you wake up coughing, the air filled with heat, smoke, and the sound of collapsing beams. Sometimes the flames move faster than news does. Neighbors might flee in every direction, tossing belongings into the street, trampling each other with chamber pots, loaves of bread, and prized terracotta chickens. One fringe account describes a woman dragging her goat down 5 flights of stairs in the middle of the night, screaming, "This is my dowry," the entire way. And you might think, why not build everything in stone? Good question. Answer, cost. Stone was pricey, and Rome's building code was, how should we put this? Flexible. Developers took shortcuts. The rich lived in villas made of marble. You lived in what was basically a glorified matchbox stacked like Jenga. Interestingly, Rome did have laws requiring fire safety as early as the 2nd century BC, but enforcement was about as consistent as a broken sundial. Technically, landlords were supposed to build with some fire precautions. In practice, though, if your cousin knew a magistrate, those precautions could be as simple as a few pots of sand and a deeply optimistic prayer. The city did experiment with organizing patrols and formal night watchers who'd stroll the streets, watching for suspicious smoke or sounds of distress. But they weren't exactly reliable. Sometimes they were more interested in drinking your wine than saving your home. Here's where things get darker and weirder. According to some fringe historians, there were occasional whispers of nighttime accidents that felt a little too convenient. Fires that started near recently disputed properties. Flames that rose after failed political bids or family feuds. Let's just say not all Roman fires were spontaneous. By now, you sleep lightly. Every pop of a torch or shout in the distance has you jolting awake, nose twitching for smoke. You know it's not if fire comes its win. And the real kicker? This isn't even the worst part. Because very soon, a wealthy man named Marcus Licinius Crassus is going to see this chaos and, instead of fixing it, will find a way to profit from it. But that's a smoky story for tomorrow's breath, you. Wake up to shouting again. Only this time it's not your neighbor's usual domestic drama about lentils. Dot 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 dot. A chorus of heavy footsteps echoes through the alley, and you catch a whiff of something bitter in the air. Smoke. You blink, grab your tunic, and stumble to the window. Down below, a cluster of men is forming a line, each with a bucket. All moving with an urgency that somehow feels both frantic and hopeless. This, dear sleeper, is what passes for firefighting in early Rome. The ancient version of do your best and try not to die. Before Crassus, before organized anything, fires were a community affair. You didn't wait for help, you became help. If a neighbor's house caught flame, your choices were clear. Join the line, or risk the blaze, hopping to your roof next. So you pass buckets. You shout. You watch as wet clay tiles steam and crack under the heat, your arms aching as water sloshes over your tunic. And all the while the fire climbs, laughing at your effort. The earliest fire brigades weren't brigades at all. They were whatever labor you could scramble together. Often it was slaves. Not trained, not equipped, just human desperation in motion. Wealthy Romans might send out their household staff with orders to protect their properties. But helping the neighbors? That was optional. Solidarity had limits. Some historians still argue whether these bucket brigades were public-spirited or just self-preserving. After all, if your neighbor's roof goes up, yours might follow. Helping isn't so much generous as tactical, and the tools, a joke. Buckets. Yes. Sometimes wet blankets, if you were lucky. No pressure hoses, no ladders worth their salt. And definitely no breathing masks. Just tunics wrapped over your mouth and hope in your lungs. Let's talk logistics. The buckets were made of leather or clay, heavy when full, awkward when empty. Water came from public fountains or wells, so imagine, in the middle of a panic, someone having to sprint 3 streets over just to refill a jug. And God's help you if the aqueduct in your neighborhood was dry that day, then there was the siphon. Ah yes, Rome's ancient attempt at a water pump. Think of it as a bronze and wood contraption resembling a demented accordion. 2 men would pump like mad while a third aimed the thin jet of water at the flames, more like a polite spray than a dousing. Fringe accounts suggest that some early models were so poorly made, they just leaked water straight into the operator's shoes. And what of command? Well, there was none. No chain of authority, no whistles, no signal flags. It was pure chaos, everyone. Shouting their own plans over each other, some helping, some looting. Yep, looting, because nothing says opportunity like unattended valuables in a smoke screen. And then there were the collapses. Fire weekends would quickly, especially those upper floors made of dry, cheap lumber. People would risk their lives running into burning buildings to rescue family, or furniture only to have a staircase crumble beneath them. There's a famous, but probably exaggerated tale of a merchant who saved his entire amphora collection during a fire. only to trip over his own toga and shatter it all in the street. Quirky detail for you. Some Romans believed vinegar could stop fire. Why? No idea. Maybe because it smelled like something serious. So you'll sometimes see early accounts of people tossing vinegar-soaked rags onto embers. Did it work? Only in their imaginations? But hey, better than nothing barely. Another fringe practice, using sand or even wine. Sand made a bit more sense it could smother flames. A wine, that's pure desperation. The idea of throwing vintage Falernian at a wall inferno is either admirable or tragic. Depending on how you feel about wasting a perfectly good bottle. But the wildest part? Rome had already seen this coming. As early as the 3rd century BCE, they'd had minor efforts at fire planning. There were some community leaders who'd assign lookout duties, and others who tried to establish nighttime patrols, yet none of it stuck. Bureaucracy moved slower than fire ant, let's be honest. Rome's real priorities were conquest, politics, and public baths. Fire safety? That was a domestic problem. And so, as the sun rises over your smoldering neighborhood, you wipe ash from your eyes and watch as your friends shop his. Entire livelihood collapses in on itself like a sandcastle under a wave. No one came to save it, 'cause no one. Could you help pick through the rubble? Some pottery survives. A few singed tunics. But the loss is immense. No compensation. No insurance. Just an angry landlord, a few shallow burns on your forearms, and the quiet realization that it could have been your home. It might be next time. It's in this fragile moment when Rome feels helpless. It's unprotected and flammable that a certain rich young man begins to pay very close attention. Marcus Licinius Crassus. He sees all this and doesn't think we need reform. No, he thinks, this city's flammable and I could sell the water. Crassus isn't just thinking like a businessman. He's thinking like a shark circling a sinking ship. He's about to turn firefighting into extortion with extra steps. And you're about to find out what it means when your survival depends not on bravery, but on how much you can bargain down a millionaire in sandals you're sitting on the edge of a scorched doorstep, sit still clinging to your tunic, watching a stray cat inspect the ruins of a fruit stall. Around you, ash settles like morning dew, and smoke curls lazily through the air. That's when he arrives. Tall, well-dressed, flanked by men in matching cloaks, and that unmistakable air of smug indifference. Marcus Licinius Crassus. You've heard of him, of course? Everyone has. One of the richest men in Rome, and probably one of the least sympathetic faces to see when your world is still warm from a fire. But here's the twist. He's not here to help. He's here to buy what's left. You see, Crassus didn't invent firefighting in Rome, but he did perfect its potential as a get-rich-slowly scheme with an unnervingly cruel twist. His method was simple, efficient, and morally bankrupt. Step 1. Assemble a private crew of hundreds of slaves trained to fight fires. Equip them with buckets, pumps, wet blankets, and even some of those fancy vinegar-soaked cloths for show. Step 2. Wait. Not prevent, not patrol, wait for the fire to start. Step 3. Once the fire's roaring and panic has taken over, Crassus himself or one of his agents shows up with a charming little offer. He'll buy your burning building. Right then and there. The price, usually far below market value. Because, well, it's already on fire. If you're lucky, maybe he'll toss in a few sesterces for your furniture. If you hesitate, his crew stands by, buckets untouched. It's waiting for your decision. And only after you've signed the rights over to him, verbally. Publicly, sometimes even while coughing from the smoke, then do his slaves spring into action. They fight the fire, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. Either way, Crassus now owns your property. If it survives, great. If not, well, the land's still his. And in Rome, land was everything. Historians still argue whether Crassus actually allowed fires to spread deliberately for this purpose, or merely capitalized on tragedy. There's no hard proof of arson. But the suspicious timing of his arrivals and the alarming frequency of his property acquisitions following local disasters have raised more than a few eyebrows over the centuries. There's one particularly memorable account. A modest baker's shop catches fire in the Sabura district. Crassus arrives within minutes. The baker, panicked, refuses to sell. Crassus calmly turns away. His men stand by, arms folded. The crowd pleads, but the crew does nothing. Flames climb, roof collapses, 2 more buildings catch. Finally, the baker, sobbing, agrees. Crassus nods once. The slaves leap into action. A few hours later, the fire is out. Crassus owns the entire block. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Crassus was known for keeping his crew in different colored tunics. For organization, but so that witnesses could describe them more vividly. The image stuck, rows of coordinated men standing idly while negotiations took place in the foreground. It was as much theater as it was business, and this wasn't a rare occurrence. Crassus amassed a massive portfolio this way, burned properties, repaired or rebuilt cheaply, then rented or flipped at a profit. He loved real estate more than politics or glory. Some say he only entered politics to protect his investments. Others claim his political career was just another ladder, like the literal ones his men carried around on standby. Remember? This was a time when the Roman elite didn't work in the traditional sense. Wealth came from land, inheritance, conquest. Crassus, he hustled. And while his methods were morally suspect, they were undeniably effective. He became one of the richest men in Roman history, not through war or trade, but through calculated opportunism and a deep understanding of fear. Here's a fun mental image. Crassus probably slept well at night, knowing Rome was a city of kindling, and he owned the only reliable buckets. Of course, people started to notice. Whispers followed him like smoke. Some called him a savior, others a vulture, but no one could stop him. There were no laws against it. Fire prevention wasn't regulated. Property transfer under duress? Legal, if witnessed. It was exploitation. In plain view in Rome, a city always teetering between order and chaos, allowed it. And maybe, in some twisted way, Crassus did help. After all, buildings were saved. Fires were extinguished. People were pedalblet, insultingly low sums. He filled a void the state hadn't yet acknowledged, using private funds and private muscle. A one-man proto-fire department. With a for-profit twist, one historian described him as the man who sold Rome back to itself, one fire at a time. Now, let's be honest. In today's world, we'd call this extortion, predatory behavior, a disaster capitalist of the highest order. But in Rome, it was innovation. The line between entrepreneur and villain was blurry, and Crassus walked it like a tightrope in a toga. Ironically, his popularity rose alongside his property holdings. He threw parties, backed politicians, even funded temples. It's hard to hate the guy who just donated a marble fountain to your neighborhood, even if he bought the land under your aunt's burning apartment to do it. There's even a fringe theory that Crassus's fire crews trained by starting small, controlled fires themselves just to stay sharp. Was it true? Probably not. But it's the kind of rumor that fits. And if there's one thing Rome loves more than tragedy, it's gossip about tragedy. So next time you smell smoke drifting through your insula, you'll wonder, is it an accident? Or an offer on the way? You're wiping sweat from your brow. Sitting outside a tavern with a chipped cup of lukewarm wine, when you hear that someone's house went up in flames near the Esquiline Hill. Last night, again, and guess who was seen wandering the site at dawn, chin tilted, pointing at the rubble, like he was choosing curtains? Crassus, of course it was. By now, everyone in Rome knows the drill. A fire starts sometimes mysteriously. A crowd gathers. Then Crassus arrives in a tidy litter, looks around calmly, and offers to buy what's left of your livelihood. And here's the real stomach turner. You're lucky if he shows up, because if he doesn't, no one's coming. You might hate him, but at least he's got buckets. This has become a grotesque ritual. Property hostage negotiation, Roman-style. Your neighbor. Marcus Potter, with exactly 2 good kill pots to his name, tells you the story through gritted teeth. His shop caught fire. Not fully. just a smoky, smoldering spark. A flammable shelf full of stropped amphory started it. Could have been doused quickly. But before he could even grab his water jug, Crassus's men were there. They didn't. Touched the fire, stood nearby, waiting. Crassus himself arrived with a thin smile and a too-smooth voice. Offered to buy the building at a fraction of its worth. Before it's ruined, he said, you can still walk away with something. Marcus, of course, refused. So they waited and watched. The flames grew. A few neighbors screamed for help, but the crew remained motionless and eerie. Silent line of able-bodied men, just watching destruction unfold. When the fire spread to the adjoining bakery, the baker agreed immediately to sell. That side of the building got water, buckets flew, blankets were thrown. Marcus's side, still smoldering, eventually, he caved. Not because of the fire, but because of the calculation. Crassus had created a brutal economic equation, your dignity or your home. You could stand your ground and lose everything, or bend the knee and keep at least a slice. Some called it negotiation. Others called it legalized extortion. The more philosophical Romans compared it to gladiator combattu, can try to fight. But the outcome's usually decided before the first swing. There's an especially bizarre incident recorded by a fringe chronicler. Take it with a pinch of Roman salt. A widow whose small tenement caught fire refused to sell despite hours of pleading. Crassus reportedly returned the next day, once the ruins were cold, and offered to buy the land for even less than before. When she threw ashes at him, his men laughed and bought the property from her cousin instead. Historians still argue. Whether these stories were embellished by Crassus's enemies or grimly accurate portraits of a man who saw property like chess pieces, disposable and always for the taking, the system became so normalized that people began prepping for it. Homeowners kept ledgers estimating their property's worth pre- and post-fire, trying to calculate what Crassus might offer. Some even welcomed the approach, eager for a way to cash out of a dilapidated structure without investing in repairs. Quirky side note. At one point, Crassus had so many properties in Rome that he reportedly lost track of some. A story circulated about him visiting a district and pointing out a building he liked, only for his aide to inform him, "You already own it." Still, not every Roman bowed easily. There were moments of defiance. Occasionally locals would band together to try to put out a blaze before Crassus could arrive. Managed to save 3 shops before Crassus's men could buy them up. But those efforts were rare and often met with legal consequences. Crassus had friends in high places. Accusations of trespassing, obstructing emergency workers, even vandalism would be thrown around to dissuade future resistance. After all, the line between legality and theft in Rome was often written in whoever had the bigger purse. And let's talk psychology for a moment. Imagine you're standing outside your own house, watching it smolder. People are whispering around you. A man in silk sandals offers to buy it for half what you paid. His men stand behind him, strong, clean, holding the tools that might still save it. You know what happens if you say no? But what if you say yes? Do you blame him? Or the system that let him thrive? Because Crassus wasn't operating in secret. I bragged about his strategy. He called it clever, efficient, even civic. And in a twisted way, he wasn't wrong. He did rebuild. He did employ people. Even restored temples and roads near. His holdings, he just made sure you paid the price first. It all led to a strange paradox. Crassus was hated and admired, despised and needed. His reach was too wide. He owned too much. He was the landlord of your cousin, the investor. Behind your butcher's stall, the guy who paved the street outside your bathhouse. Saying no to him was like saying no to gravity. So you start to think maybe you should have your house appraised now, just in case. Maybe you should memorize the names of his lieutenants, figure out which ones negotiate gently and which smile. Too much. Maybe you should stash your valuables in a fast 2-grab bag and keep your deeds in a waterproof pouch, because you never know when you'll smell that smoke. And the worst part, he'll come with that same calm voice, that same soft shrugged, and that same question, what do you want for it? And not the good kind, like street performers or kids chasing a cart of figs. No, This shouting has edge. Accusatory, urgent, angry. You hear the word Ignis fire and you sit up in bed, heart thumping. But there's something odd. No smoke, no flicker. It's just a cluster of neighbors pointing at nothing. And then someone mutters, Crassus was just here. And that's when it hits you. The fire didn't come yet, but someone acted like it would. Welcome to the next level of Roman paranoia, because now people are starting to wonder, are some of these fires even accidents anymore? See, Crassus's little empire of opportunism didn't just give him wealth. It gave him reputation. And reputation, in a city built on gossip and power plays, is worth more than gold leaf on a senator's sandal. Word on the street is Crassus buys buildings that are burning, and if they're not burning, well, sometimes they mysteriously become more flammable. Historians still argue whether Crassus ever directly ordered arson. There's no courtroom confession, no written directive. But there are patterns, like buildings catching fire shortly after their owners refuse to sell, like neighbors accidentally spilling oil lamps onto suspiciously dry wood piles, like the oddly convenient way his crews showed up before the local water carriers did. One fringe report, likely exaggerated but delightfully dramatic, claims that Crassus once stationed men on rooftops with torches, waiting for a signal to light the thatch. Supposedly it never came. But the fact that this story even existed tells you something about the atmosphere. People were beginning to fear fire, less than they feared him, and maybe you can't blame them. Rome is, after all, a city of shadows and alleyways, of power traded, under the table, and favors bought with silence. Fires. It's easy to start, especially when most of the buildings are built like flammable sandwiches. Timber, lath and plaster, stacked layer upon layer with staircases as chimneys. And then there's accidental arson, okay, the kind no one can quite prove, but everyone suspects. The disgruntled tenant, the rival merchant. All it takes is a little oil, a candle, and a locked door. In this context, Crassus doesn't need to start fires. He just needs people to believe he might. That belief alone does half the work. You, for example, might think twice before refusing to sell your workshop near one of his larger holdings. Because what if? That what if is a powerful weapon. And Crassus, he knows how to wield it. He's built an ecosystem where even the fire itself is suspicious, where the act of not burning feels unusual, and where flames once seen as chaotic now seem weirdly choreographed. It doesn't help that some of his properties keep catching fire again after he's bought them. Strange, right? Usually just enough to justify rebuilding. Never enough to lose the land. Always enough to trigger a cleanup. It's almost like fire became his version of spring cleaning. There's even a weird fringe theory among the merchant class that Crassus had his slaves start fires under his own roofs, just to claim damages, except there was no real insurance system in Rome, so it's unclear what he'd be claiming. Still, the image of a man so obsessed with the economics of flame that he'd risk his own holdings? Disturbingly plausible. And while all this is swirling, you're walking around your neighborhood, eyeing every torch, every brazier, every waxy glow through a window, wondering, is this dinner or demolition? That sense of creeping paranoia changes the way Rome breathes. People start installing iron gates and wooden doorways. They pay boys to stay up at night as lookouts. Taverna owners splash wine on their thresholds not to bless them, but to keep them damp. Fires, once freak accidents, are now assumed to be deliberate. Your city becomes a tinderbox of suspicion. Even the wealthy aren't immune. Senators quietly begin hiring guards not to protect their families, but to patrol the rooftops. And some prominent Romans take their concerns to the forum, demanding investigations into the mysterious rise in economically convenient fires. The Senate debates. Nothing happens. Why? Oh. And he's rich enough to bankroll half of its members' campaign debts. Which brings us to the real gut punch. No matter how scared you are, there's no one to complain to. Crassus isn't breaking a law. He's not even technically doing anything wrong. He's just being opportunistic. A few even formed their own fire brigades, small, scattered, underfunded, but determined. They train in alleyways, keep jars of water near every hearth, teach kids how to spot smoke early. One even drafts a crude fire alarm system using temple bells. These groups rarely last. Funding dries up, morale fades, or worse, Crassus buys them. Yes, really. In one documented case, a local watch team was invited to merge with Crassus's crew for a generous donation and a promise of better tools. They agreed. Within weeks, they were wearing his livery and only responding to fires on his properties. There's a joke that starts circulating among Roman poets. When the gods made fire, Crassus made the contract. And yet you keep living here, because what choice do you have? It's Rome, the city of empire, of temples, of possibilities. Also, the city of smoky skies and quiet deals made over flaming rooftops. At some point, you wonder, would it be smarter to start your own fire, not out of malice? Just business. You've got an aging workshop no one wants. Crassus might. All it would take is a little push, just one little spark. And that, right there, is how the real danger starts. Not in the flames, but in the thinking. It's been a few years now, and the skyline hasn't changed much, just a little more smoke here, a few more rooftops blackened there. But one morning, you hear something different. The heavy footfalls of marching boots, synchronized and authoritative, echoing through the streets like thunder in a canyon. Then you see them rows of men in matching tunics, armed not with swords but with water pumps, hooks, and axes. No, this isn't another one of Crassus's crews. These are the Vigiles of Rome's first official firefighters. Well, kind of. See, eventually, the chaos got to be too much event for emperors. After years of catastrophic fires and citizen complaints, someone had to do something. That someone? Emperor Augustus, the same man who rebranded Rome from a republic into an empire and liked to pretend he brought peace to everything, including the flames, in 06 CE. Augustus established the cohorts Vigilum, a new corps of around 7,000 freedmen tasked with protecting the city from fire and crime. Sounds promising, right? It's at last real public servants. But don't light your victory candle just yet, unless it's citron-scented. It's in place safely away from flammable surfaces. These guys weren't exactly Rome's finest. They were mostly former slaves, recruited from lower classes men with no property, little education, and plenty of reasons to take shortcuts. Augustus didn't want to trust this kind of task to elite troops, too risky, too political. So instead, he trusted it to men who had every reason to accept: incentives. The Vigiles were divided into 7 cohorts, each assigned to one of the city's 14 regions. They had special barracks, equipment stores, and even horses for speedy response. They carried siphonae, the bronze water pumps de labre, sharp axes for breaking down doors, and hooks for tearing apart burning buildings. They even had big water tanks placed throughout the city. Rome's version of fire hydrants, set filled by aqueducts and blessed by very tired donkeys. Now, historians still argue whether this was a true turning point or just window dressing. For an empire in crisis, sure, Rome finally had an official fire service, but was it effective? That depends on your definition of effective. If you mean showing up sometimes and occasionally putting out the flames, then yes. If you mean bravery, efficiency, and honor, well, let's just say results varied. Here's where things get messy. The Vigiles were also tasked with night. Patrols part fire watch, part security force. In theory, they were supposed to spot fires early, break up drunken brawls, stop burglaries, and generally keep Rome from becoming Gotham without the bat signal. In practice, they were underpaid, overstretched, and often undermotivated. You begin to notice it in the small things. A neighbor pays a Vigiles to check in on his bakery twice a week. Suddenly, it never burns down. Another pays for accidental water spills in dry months. Yet another pays not to have his after-hours parties reported. The pattern's familiar. You've seen this movie before. It just used to star Crassus. Turns out, the Vigiles learned from the best. In fact, Crassus's methods were so infamous that many Vigiles started adopting them, minus the wealth and silk sandals. For the right price, they'd prioritize your burning house over the one next door. Refuse to bribe them? Oops, Guess they took a wrong turn in the alley. There's a story half true, half legend of a Vigiles who refused to douse a wine shop fire because the owner once insulted his helmet. The entire block went up. When questioned, he claimed the smoke had confused him. Quirky side note, each Vigiles carried a badge made of bronze with a number and symbol. These were supposed to track accountability, but they were so easily faked or swapped that many just wore the same ones for years without issue. Collectors now consider them ancient Roman bureaucracy's most adorable failure. Of course, not all Vigiles were shady. Some genuinely cared. You'll hear about a crew on the Aventine Hill that saved an entire street by forming a human chain through the night. Passing buckets from the Tiber, a heroic moment, immortalized in one of those cheap mosaics near the Forum Complete, with wildly exaggerated muscles and suspiciously well-groomed beards. But those were the exceptions. Because the bigger issue, the Vigiles didn't fear anyone. Not really. Sure, there were laws against extortion or negligence. But enforcement? Weak punishments? Rare. Most citizens, especially the poor, were too scared to report abuse, and those who did found themselves mysteriously robbed later, or woke up to their door charred by an accidental spark. So you adapt. You keep small coins near your front door just in case. You greet the patrols with fresh bread, fake smiles, and casual compliments about their strong forearms. Learn which ones are actually helpful and which ones you should avoid, like moldy lentils. You start to realize the Vigiles aren't just Rome's firefighters, they're Rome's new gatekeepers. They can make or break your night. They can protect you, ignore you, or quietly threaten to do neither. And yet, deep down, you still want to believe in them, because the idea is good, right? Organized fire protection, civic responsibility, dream of a city where flames don't mean bankruptcy. But the reality? A patchwork of ambition, corruption, and occasional moments of unexpected heroism. Rome burns a little slower now, but it still burns. And as you settle in for the night, a familiar thought returns. Do you smell smoke, or just someone bartering? For help, the rain comes rarely, and never when you want it. Tonight, it's dry, again bone dry. You lie on your back, eyes tracing the ceiling beams, listening to the faint creak of wood above you. That wood, by the way, hasn't been replaced since Tiberius was a teenager. One errant spark from your neighbor's cooking fire, and you'll be making your next bed on a patch of scorched cobblestone. But here's the curious thing. Tonight, you're not just worried about natural fire anymore, because like everyone else in your quarter, you've been hearing a different kind of rumor. The kind whispered in wine shops and scribbled in charcoal on alley walls. Rumors that some of the fires aren't accidental at all, but strategic. Not personal grudges, not kitchen blunders, but tactics. See, Rome isn't just a city of senators and bakers and overly dramatic poets. It's also a city of factions, rival merchants, political gangs, religious zealots, and increasingly these groups are realizing what Crassus figured out decades ago. Fire is power. Historians still argue whether the early 1st century CE saw an actual spike in strategic arson, or if it was just the paranoia of a smoke-stained city finally cracking. Either way, the fear is real. Don't just check your neighbor's torch. Check who your neighbor voted for in the last Forum election. There's an especially tense moment during one of the plebeian council meetings, where a speaker accuses a rival faction of lighting the path to reform with flame. The crowd laughs nervously, but the next morning, his villa is gone poof. Ash. And here's where the Vigiles re-enter the scene, not as heroes, but as pawns. You begin to notice which blocks they always show up to protect, and which ones they just sort of let smolder. Turns out, if your neighborhood backed the wrong politician, your firefighting response time slows to a leisurely trot, the Vigiles are still technically servants of the emperor. But in a city run on favors and favors for favors, they're often lent out loaned, like furniture. You start hearing phrases like the Eastern Patrol is loyal to the Claudians, or don't bother calling help from Region V. They answer to Fulvius now. Rome becomes a chessboard, and fire. It's the rook, not subtle, but powerful. And just threatening to use it is often enough. A particularly quirky tidbit from this era: wealthy merchants begin renting vigil loyalty in exchange for providing their cohort with fresh tunics, better wine, or even get this seasonal sandals. One generous donor even threw in free massages from his bathhouse, and suddenly, his entire block becomes the safest square mile in the city. Coincidence? Please. Meanwhile, religious tensions begin to spark their own flame wars, quite literally. New cults spring up in alleys and abandoned temples, and some of them are none too fond of Rome's established order. One breakaway group is accused of torching a statue of Mars in protest. Another allegedly sets fire to an elite wine cellar, claiming it was corrupted by decadence. And here's where things get really messy. Crassus may be gone dead in ash himself, but his ghost haunts the flames. Everyone remembers how he manipulated fire for profit, and now, lesser imitators are trying to do the same. Only this time, without the wealth, the charm, or the faint illusion of legality. Suddenly, you've got fire hustlers. Men who light up corner of a building, then show up to help for a fee. They're not firefighters. They're just desperate, clever, and covered in soot. Some even pretend to be part of the Vigiles, wearing stolen tunics and shouting orders to each other. It's like street theater, except the stage is your burning pantry. One well-documented case involves two brothers who started fires on the edge of the Aventine, waited for chaos to erupt, then offered rescue services to the highest bidder. They were finally caught when they accidentally torched their own storage shed inside, which they had a detailed ledger of bribes, schedules, and a to-do list that literally included ignite sidewall behind Tanner's stall. By now, you can't even smell smoke without wondering who lit it and why. And Rome's response? More laws. Always more laws. Decrees against arson, penalties for impersonating vigils, mandatory inspections of flammable goods, fines for storing too many amphorae in tight spaces. One edict even banned keeping more than 2 oil lamps in the same room at night, unless you were a priest or extremely good at explaining yourself. Do these laws help? Not much. Like most Roman reforms, they're written by the rich, enforced by the board, ignored by everyone else. You start to adapt. Again, some people coat their ceilings in clay. Others install rooftop cisterns. Neighbor digs a shallow moat and fills it with urine because he heard it's fire resistant. It's also people resistant. Judging by the smell, some folks just move to the countryside. Fewer people, fewer buildings, fewer torch-bearing opportunists. But you stay, 'cause you're Roman. And if there's one thing Romans do better than conquer, it's cope. Still, it wears on you. The sleepless nights, the whispered suspicions, the way every flickering light makes you flinch. You used to worry about fire. Now you worry about why the fire started. Is it a kitchen mishap? A political message? A shakedown gone wrong? Just someone trying to clear a path to buy cheap land? The irony? You've never known so many people who fear fire, and yet you've also never seen so many people willing to use it. And all the while, Rome keeps glowing in the night. Not with stars, but with embers. You wake up to the sound of laughter. You're strange, considering someone's workshop burned down last night. But this laughter isn't joyful, it's the brittle, exhausted kind. The kind that says, of course it happened again. You shuffle out to the street where a group of neighbors stands around a blackened doorway. Someone tosses a charred spoon into the gutter. At least the fire kept the rats away, someone says. Another snorts. Then silence, because what's there to say anymore? Fire isn't a tragedy, it's routine, expected, just another Tuesday. You remember when fires used to draw crowds? Now they barely earn a glance, unless it's a big, one really big. The kind that turns whole districts to smoke. The kind you feel in your lungs for days. And yes, you've had a few of those. There was the Great Fire of 36 CE, for instance. Took out a good chunk of the Celian Hill. Rumor was it started in a dye shop. That's believable. Those places were full of flammable oils and overconfident apprentices. But some folks whispered that the building's owner had debts. Big ones. And after the fire, those debts mysteriously vanished along with half the block, and several inconvenient witnesses. Historians still argue whether that fire was economic sabotage. political cover-up, or just another case of bad luck and too much olive oil near an open flame? Probably all three. Fires like that had a strange side effect. They gave Rome moments of clarity. Just after the smoke cleared, people started talking about what needed to change. Safer building materials, better inspections, emergency protocols. But like most things in Rome, the urgency faded as soon as the scent of smoke did. Still, a few reforms did sneak through. One of the more surprising: Emperor Claudius pushed a law requiring apartment buildings over a certain height to install water buckets on every floor. It sounds obvious, right? But at the time, it was revolutionary. Not because of the buckets, but because it marked the first time the state admitted that tall buildings were a hazard. Let's talk about those buildings for a moment. Tinselae, they're called. You live in one, probably. Everyone does, unless you're a senator or someone rich enough to afford a house with actual columns. Insulae are the Roman equivalent of apartment blocks, several stories high, packed tight and built out of whatever was cheap that year. Brick on the bottom, wood on the top, Sphire's favorite sandwich. Some fringe reports suggest that landlords started deliberately using low-quality wood on the upper floors, so that, in the event of fire, they'd lose less valuable space. That's right, they budgeted for burning. It gets worse. Some owners insured their buildings through informal risk-sharing arrangements with investors. One letter discovered in the ruins of a scribe's office mentions a plan for loss by divine flame and includes 3 names, with attached sums likely people who'd agreed to buy shares in a building's possible destruction. That's ancient Roman insurance, folks. Not prevention, just preparation. And then there's the math. Crassus may be gone, but his economic mindset still rules the streets. Let's say a building costs 1,000 sesterces to build. Rent brings in 200 a year. That's a 5-year payback. But if it burns after 2, and you've already recovered for 100, and maybe sold the land for redevelopment, that's a tidy little profit. It's hard to think like this. It feels wrong. But when everyone else does, you either join them or get swallowed. Rome doesn't reward caution. It rewards calculus. Quirky little shift. Some landlords start offering fire rent discounts. Yes, really. If your apartment is directly under a known fire risk like a kitchen, a lamp shop, or a particularly reckless tenant, you get a slightly cheaper rate. Because why not add a touch of pricing strategy to your personal safety? Meanwhile, the Vigiles do what they can. Some patrol at night with torches, which, let's be honest, feels ironic. Others carry brass whistles to alert neighborhoods. They hold training exercises, complete with staged fires and heroic drills. But morale? Mixed. Half the force seems exhausted, the other half suspiciously well-fed, and entirely too well-connected with local landlords. One cohort is known for accepting speed fees. You pay ahead, and if your building ever catches fire, they promise a 10-minute response. Do they have a system to ensure it? No. Do they show up faster for those who paid? Oh yes. It's easy to blame the Vigiles, but the truth is there. Just a mirror of Rome itself. Practical, a bit corrupt, occasionally noble, and always under pressure. There's an open debate among philosophers at the baths. Is fire a divine punishment, or just human error multiplied over time? Stoics say it's fate. Epicureans say it's bad planning. Cynics say check the land deeds, and you just want to sleep through the night without waking up to the smell of cedar beams turning to ash. So you do what everyone else does. You plan your escape routes. You wrap your documents in oilcloth. You keep your savings near the door, and you sleep lightly, because you never know when someone's going to make a deal behind your back, or when the bakery downstairs will leave their oven burning just a little too long. Rome is beautiful. Rome is eternal. But Rome is always, always flammable. You wake up for once, to silence, no shouting, no smoke, no soot streaked across the cobblestones, or bucket brigades sloshing through puddles of someone else's disaster. The birds are chirping. The sun is creeping through your cracked shutter in that golden Roman way that makes you forget the grime for a second. For the first time in weeks, you think, maybe we're finally past this fire madness. But then you open your door and trip over a man. Well, not just any man, a bureaucrat. Scrolls clutched to his chest like they might catch fire themselves. He looks up wide-eyed, sweaty, and mutters, "Sorry, inspection." You blink. He blinks. Then he scuttles off toward the next doorway, scribbling notes and muttering about flammable overhangs. Ah, yes. Fire inspections. The latest imperial solution to a problem as old as kindling. You see, after the Great Fire of 64 CE, yes, that one will get to it later. Rome's government finally woke up with a hangover of epic proportions. Buildings had to be safer, lower, wider spaced. And thus began the grand tradition of state-appointed busybodies wandering the streets, peering at beams, poking at staircases, and shaking their heads disapprovingly. Historians still argue whether these inspections did much actual good, or were simply a way to shuffle blame around after each new blaze. But the point is, Rome tried. For once, someone tried. The fire code became law, though enforcement remained selective. One decree limited the height of new buildings to 70 Roman feet. It's about 7 stories, still tall enough for a decent ankle sprain, but low enough to discourage full building collapses. Builders grumbled. Architects groaned. Landlords faked the numbers, built up anyway, and simply bribed the inspector with a new tunic or a roasted chicken. Still, some efforts did land. Stone began to replace wood in public spaces. Roof tiles became heavier, less charming but harder to ignite. People stopped storing Garamome's infamous fermented fish sauce next to their open flames. Progress, meanwhile. Vigiles started keeping ledgers. Not just names of bribe payers anymore, but actual maps. Which buildings had cisterns? Which ones had fireproof walls? Which ones had too many poponithos, tiny taverns where one careless cook could turn an alley into a chimney? And fun fact, Rome even experimented with something akin to zoning. Certain flammable trades were slowly pushed to the outskirts. Tanners, dyers, and lamp makers found themselves in Courage Dread, forced to move beyond the main districts. The idea was to contain the risk. The reality was a black market for quietly smelly permits near high-traffic areas. You're watching all of this unfold with a kind of weary optimism. On one hand, you're grateful someone finally noticed the city could go up like a toga on a torch. On the other, you've seen what reform means in Rome. It means scrolls, meetings, taxes, and most of all, loopholes. Here's a new one you particularly enjoy: the ceremonial inspection. It involves a low-ranking senator arriving at a marketplace with 2 assistants, staring vaguely at walls, nodding solemnly, and declaring everything satisfactory after, which he is promptly invited to a lunch hosted by the very landlord he just waved through. But at least they're trying, right? A particularly quirky twist from this era: some buildings start advertising themselves as fire-safe. They hang painted plaques near the entrance, usually featuring a smug-looking house with tiny flames bouncing harmlessly off the walls. These are mostly marketing gimmicks. One famously caught fire while its sign was still drying. Then there's the trend of fire festivals. No, not the music kind. These were community events, often funded by local merchants, where citizens would practice bucket chains, cheer for the vigils, and eat slightly overcooked lentils. Think of them as public relations exercises with a hint of survival training. Kids loved them. Adults showed up mostly for the free bread and wine, of course. Not everything was so cheerful, because here's the truth. The inspections, codes, the zoning, they didn't stop the fires. They just made it slightly harder to pretend no one was responsible. When a fire happened now, people looked for causes. Sometimes they found names: builders, tenants, senators who approved shoddy construction, vigils who arrived 20 minutes late because they were napping behind the granary. And those names, once whispered, started appearing in public, on tablets, on walls, on the lips of very angry mobs. A famous example: the case of Publius Viarison, ambitious land developer who ignored a dozen fire safety rules, stacked tenants like amphorae in a warehouse, and then blamed act of the gods when it all went up like a Saturnalia torch parade. The gods, apparently, were not amused. Verus was pelted with bricks during a forum speech and promptly vanished from public life. You begin to feel it. A shift. Not a revolution, but a low rumbling awareness that maybe, just maybe, Rome's residents are tired of burning down and building back up over and over. And yet when your neighbor's cousin builds a new insula next month, what do you hear? That he's using old wood, skimping on supports, and bribing the inspector with a trip to buy, because the fire may be out, but the system's still smoldering. And so you go back to your day. You sweep your stoop. You nod to the patrolling. Vigils. You count your emergency coins. Every now and then you glance up at the roof beams, wondering if that inspection scroll really means anything. Or if your ceiling is still in its quiet way. Plotting your eviction by ember. You're halfway through a bowl of barley stew when it happens. A low, dull roar in the distance. You freeze, spoon halfway to your mouth. Then a shout, then another. You rise slowly, stepping onto your balcony just in time to see it a wall of smoke blooming like a dark, angry cloud from the direction of the Circus Maximus. Your neighbor's already running. Someone else screams, "It's burning again." This time, it doesn't stop. You've seen fires before, but not like this. This one doesn't flicker politely in a corner waiting to be negotiated with. This one devours. Roof tiles crack, beams collapse, animals scream from distant pens, and somewhere, impossibly, a statue explodes in a shower of melted bronze. You're witnessing the Great Fire of 64 CE on history, unfortunately, has front row seats reserved just for you. It begins, so the stories go, in the shops lining the base of the Circus Maximus. All those flammable goods crammed into close quarters textiles, oils, wooden frames, spices. The perfect place to accidentally invent a citywide disaster. The fire rages for 6 straight days. 6. Then it reignites and burns for another 3. It's not a fire, it's a marathon. It's a cruel, relentless race against wind, negligence, and architecture made of kindling. 10 of Rome's 14 districts are affected. 3 are completely destroyed. You spend the first day running away from the flames, then back toward them, then away again. You try to grab your things, but the air is too hot. Your skin feels tight, like it's drying out just from proximity. You taste ash when you breathe. You hear prayers, curses, collapsing walls, and somehow a man yelling about a lost parrot. And the city breaks. Bricks melt, marble fractures. Temples vanish into columns of smoke. Even the aqueducts falter under the heat. The vigils, brave, confused, overwhelmed, can't hold the line. Their pumps dry up, their buckets snap. Some run, some stay. Some give up and start pulling children from windows. Historians still argue whether Emperor Nero ordered the fire, or whether he simply failed to stop it. Suetonius swears he played the lyre while Rome burned an image too perfect to trust. Tacitus, more cautious, says Nero wasn't even in the city when it started. But then again, Nero does have a habit of being conveniently absent during disasters he's rumored to enjoy. You hear all sorts of whispers. That Nero wanted to clear land for a new palace, that he blamed the Christians who, let's face it, weren't exactly popular, launched a persecution campaign to redirect public fury. That he later wandered the ruins praising the epic poetry of the destruction. But you're not thinking about Nero. You're thinking about your neighbors. Shop, now a pile of smoldering timber. You're thinking about your friend's cat, who darted into the smoke and never came back. You're thinking about how fire can erase a life so fast it doesn't even leave time for goodbyes. And then comes the rebuilding. Because Nero loathe him, or laugh nervously when he walks past. Doesn't waste a good crisis, declares. Emergency reforms. Wider streets, stricter building codes, mandatory stone walls, new firefighting barracks. He even imposes a building tax on wealthy citizens to help pay for it all. Unsurprisingly, they are not thrilled. One of the quirkier changes. Nero mandates that every new home must have an open courtyard to prevent fire from jumping building to building. The rich celebrate this as an architectural innovation. The poor call it the hole in my roof I can't afford to fill. There's even talk of making the vigils part of the military, give them discipline, better funding, uniforms with actual armor. But the Senate vetoes the idea. They're terrified of giving any more armed authority to Nero, who already seems too fond of colonnaded command centers. The tragedy also creates a new economy, the fire elite. A new class of developers and investors rush to buy up the charred. Lots for cheap, promising to rebuild, and they do. With shiny marble fronts and new mosaics, and the same old wooden beams hidden inside, because let's be honest, progress has its budget limits. You hear of one man, a former fish sauce distributor, who builds an entire block of insulate on land he bought for 1/10 of its value while it was still smoldering. He names the complex Phoenix Residences. It burns again 6 years later, but amid all this rebuilding, something in Rome shifts. The fire wasn't just a disaster, it was a reset. The memory of it lingers, thick and inescapable. Kids play. Games pretending to be vigils. Temples offer prayers to Vulcan weekly now, not yearly. And whenever someone hears a pop or crack in the night, you can feel the entire district hold its breath. You find yourself obsessively checking your own walls. You dampen your threshold. You dream of fire creeping under your door, whispering. In that same crackling voice Crassus once used, what do you want for it? Because while the great fire has ended, the fear hasn't. The city's still fragile, still flammable. Still, one forgotten oil lamp away from catastrophe. And you're still here, because this is Rome. And Rome always rebuilds. You've grown used to the smell of ash. It's in the cracks between your floorboards, clinging to your tunics, woven into the city's very breath. The Great Fire may have ended years ago, but you still taste it sometimes like burnt figs at the back of your throat. And you're not alone. Rome, reborn from embers, walks like someone recovering from a fever. A little shaky, little too warm. More cautious than before, but only just. The buildings may be newer, the courtyards wider, the codes stricter, but you still eye every flickering torch like it's about to deliver a personal vendetta. And honestly, you're not wrong, because while Nero's reforms reshaped the city's bones, they didn't do much for its soul. Sure, buildings are less flammable, but people, still greedy, still vengeful, still very, very flammable on the inside. And now, a new phenomenon begins to emerge. Fire-based blackmail. It starts small. A few threatening notes slipped under doors, messages scratched into walls. Nice shop. Be a shame if it sparked. It's that sort of thing. At first you laugh it off. Typical Roman melodrama. But then a bakery down the street goes up in smoke and 3 days later, the landlord sells the entire block at a discount to a man known only as Severus the Smiler. Historians still argue whether these were isolated cases or the birth of a broader trend. But one thing becomes clear. Fire has become currency again. It's not just a force of nature, but a negotiation tool, a threat, a language. Some call it the silent arson war. You hear whispers of entire families moving out of buildings in the dead of night after receiving the signal, a charred olive branch on their doorstep. Weirdly poetic, deeply unsettling. Even the Vigiles, Rome's reluctant firefighters turned security force, are dragged into it. Some stand firm, doing their job. Others play both sides. One squad is rumored to take payments from racketeers to delay their response times. You don't want to believe it until you see it happen. Your friend Marcus owns a tailor shop. Modest, honest work. One night he tells you over a watered-down cup of wine that he was approached by a man offering protection. Marcus refused, said he had faith in the system. 2 weeks later, he's pulling his bolts of linen from a smoking wreck, eyes wild and hands blistered. I poured water on it myself, he says, shaking, and they just watched. You want to comfort him? But what do you say? This is Rome, and Rome has rules. Just not the kind that come written on scrolls. On the quirkier side of this dark era, a new wave of fireproof inventions start hitting the market. Oil lamps with hidden shut-off mechanisms. Clay tiles treated with vinegar. A guy near the forum starts selling asbestos tunics, which are, in fact, just thick wool dipped in chalk. Do they work? Barely, but they sell. Fear has become its own economy. You know things are bad when even public latrines start advertising certified fire safety. There's something deeply unsettling about seeing a carved sign that reads, clean, dry, spark-free. Meanwhile, Nero is going to buy sword. Not fire, but his memory lingers like smoke. The next emperors scramble to outdo his reforms. Vespasian expands the Vigiles. Domitian gives them better training. Trajan adds more equipment. And Hadrian, our resident architect, redesigns entire neighborhoods with firewalls, domed, roofs, and stone courtyards. But as you've learned, no amount of marble can stop a torch in the wrong hands. There's even a fringe philosophical movement that grows out of all this. Ignism. The belief that fire is not destruction but transformation. Its followers light small, controlled blazes in public spaces as offerings to the spirit of change. The Senate bans it within weeks, citing unacceptable civic anxiety. Still, the idea catches on in odd ways. Wealthy Romans start burning things on purpose ceremonially, of course. Old debt scrolls, tired togas. One woman famously holds a letting go party where guests toss former lovers' gifts into a marble fire pit. It's very chic, it's very dramatic, it's very Rome. But back on your street, things aren't so theatrical. They're tense, quiet. People nod too politely. No one stores kindling near the door anymore. Children are taught to sniff for smoke before they can read. The local baker leaves offerings actual loaves of bread outside the barracks of the Vigiles every Saturn's day, just in case. And you install a trapdoor in your floor, not for treasure, for escape. Because you know that no matter how many reforms, or inspections, or prayers to Vulcan, the real fire isn't in the beams, it's in people, their grudges, their schemes, their willingness to trade heat for gain. Rome has always been a city of ambition, but now it's a city that runs on the fear of combustion. Every torch casts a longer shadow. Every ember tells a story, and every night you sleep with one eye open, not for burglars, not for wolves, but for the quiet. Creeping sound of flame, you barely notice the festivals anymore. Rome celebrates everything: harvests, its births, gods, victories, even well-cooked pig's butt. These days, your ears are tuned to different sounds. Not liars, not laughter. You're listening for the crackle, that subtle, hungry whisper of heat-licking stone. A cough of smoke drifting through an alleyway where it shouldn't be. You've become a connoisseur of fire. You know the difference? Between wood crackling from a baker's oven and the sharper, almost panicked snap of ceiling beams about to fail. You can smell resin 2 blocks away and tell whether it's part of a legal torch or something far more reckless. But even with all that, nothing prepares you for what happens next. It begins with a smell sweet, oddly enough, like burning myrrh. And then a glow, faint and amber, rising not from a home, not from a shop, but from a temple. Yes, a temple. Not just any temple either. The temple of Jupiter Stator, perched proudly on the Palatine Hill, beacon of tradition and law and divine Roman order. Fire, that relentless devourer of walls and reputations, has now wrapped its fingers around the gods themselves. This isn't just blasphemy. It's warfare. You rush uphill with dozens of others, robes flapping, lungs burning. The Vigiles are already there, hauling water, barking orders, trying desperately not to set their own feet on fire in the chaos. The columns are scorched. The rufa, proud bronze-styled beasties caving in at one corner. Smoke pours from a split in the rear wall like incense from a shattered urn. The crowd is silent. It's not in awe, in terror. Because this isn't just about property anymore. This is a symbol. The gods are under siege. No one knows why. Historians still argue whether this was arson, accident, or omen. Some say it was lightning. Others whisper that a scribe drunk on sacrificial wine knocked over a lamp during an impromptu poetry recital. But most point to politics. Always politics. Because not long before, a senator named Lucius Aurelius had called for reforms in temple. Funding less money for ceremonies, more for infrastructure. Less incense, more bricks. He said, "Let us serve the gods with strong walls, not golden plates." A week later, half the priesthood accused him of sacrilege. A month after that, the temple burns. Coincidence? Or a warning? And in the aftermath, it's chaos once again. Debates rage in the forum. Statues are veiled in mourning cloth. People sleep with charms carved from scorched marble. And the temple's site becomes a pilgrimage ground not for worship, but for witness. Everyone wants to see the wound. Strangely, though, something shifts after this. Something subtle. Because when the fire comes for the gods, people start asking, what else is sacred? And the answer increasingly is nothing. You start noticing things. Vendors selling purified oil lamps, certified, they claim, to resist divine wrath. Architects proposing temples with no torches allowed, only sunlight and mirrors. There's even a senator who suggests building a shrine underwater to ensure it can never burn. He is laughed out of the chamber, then quietly elected to a minor office 3 weeks later. The Vigiles, meanwhile, are under more scrutiny than ever. Their commander, a grizzled man named Rufinus, delivers an impassioned speech in the Curia. We fight not fire. We fight forgetfulness. You build and forget. We warn and you ignore. It's poetic. It's powerful. It's also a thinly veiled request for more funding. They get it, sort of. The emperor at the time, Trajan, responds with new gear, new training, and a bold experiment. A central fire tower. You watch it rise just south of the Aventine Hill, a stone spire with an observation platform at the top, and a brass bell that can be struck in emergencies. From there, Vigiles can scan the entire city for the first hint of smoke. It's a marvel. People gather to gawk at it like it's a new god. Quirky side effect, it becomes a popular dating spot. Nothing like romance. Under the scent of caution and distant Ashdot, and for a time things seem better. Fewer small fires. Faster responses. Even a few awards handed out to particularly brave firefighters' plaques. Parade honors. The occasional statue. There's one commemorating a Vigiles who leaped from a rooftop into a burning insula to rescue a child and came out. With a badly singed tunic and a brand new nickname, Crispus the Toasted Butt, underneath it all. You can feel the tension because fire hasn't been defeated, it's just waiting. You still hear the threats? You still see the schemes? The fire games, as they're now called in Whisper's secret arsons, designed not to destroy, but to distract. You hear about a warehouse burned to cover up a theft? A villa set ablaze, just as a rival senator's entourage passed by, forcing them to flee and miss an important vote. Fire as decoy. Fire as disruption. Oust the loudest kind of silence. And in the shadows, the ghosts of Crassus, Nero, and every opportunist who ever struck a flint to further a dream. They're all still. Here, you've learned to live among them. So tonight, you walk your usual route. Past the bakery, past the sculptor's yard, past the empty lot where your uncle's insula used to stand. You nod to the Vigiles. You double-check your water pot. You pull your cloak tight and breathe in the sharp scent of a nearby lamp oil. Vendor preparing for morning trade, and as you slip into sleep, the old question returns, half prayer, half resignation. If Rome is eternal, how long until it burns again? You start to notice the new city in small ways. The walls look different more. Stone, less wood. Streets seem wider, breezier, less claustrophobic. Even the rooftops feel like they're sitting farther apart, like the buildings are trying not to touch each other anymore, in case someone gets ideas. Rome, in a very Roman way, has learned just enough from its disasters to change its clothes without changing its habits. That's how you find yourself walking through a brand new district on the edge of the Esquiline Hill one morning, blinking at how clean everything looks. Smooth paving stones, fresh plaster on the walls, public fountains that actually work. You see a plaque reading built under Hadrian's fire ordinance, 122 CE. Very official. Very safe. But then you pass the back of one of these new buildings and see a bundle of dry firewood stacked directly beneath a window. Above it, an open brazier hanging from a rope pulley. You stare for a long second and sigh, because it's always the same. Rome builds. Rome burns. Rome forgets. The Vigiles are more visible now, though. You see them patrolling regularly, not just in moments of panic. They become almost ceremonial symbols of civic duty, like the laurel wreaths or the temple processions. Parents point them out to their children. Shopkeepers give them leftover bread. They still carry buckets and axes, but also scrolls, knowledgers, maps, fire readiness checklists. There's a story circulating that one cohort actually refused a bribe last week. No one believes it, of course, but the fact that it's even rumored feels like progress. You remember when fire used to be the great leveler? Back in the day, it didn't matter if you were rich or poor. Once the blaze started, you were just another frantic figure in a robe, hauling buckets and praying to any god who'd listen. Now, though, the rich don't burn the same way, because the upper classes have learned to insulate themselves. Not with better stone, though, that helps, but with access. They pay extra to have their homes watched constantly. They get exclusive response contracts with select vigil cohorts. Some even build private water lines. There's a senator rumored to have a cistern so large it has fish in it. Meanwhile, in the poorer districts, fires still smolder in alleyways, torch the corners of bakeries, and curl up into the beams of old workshops. Quirky detail, one street near the Subura now has a patron deity of flame prevention, not an official god, mind you, but a local creation named Fumina, a kind of smoke fairy whose likeness is chalked onto every doorway. She has a long nose and angry eyebrows. People leave her offerings of wet moss. It doesn't help. But people feel better, and that increasingly seems to be Rome's approach. Manage the fear, not the fire. Emperors know this too. After Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius continued the slow bureaucratic dance of reform. More inspectors, more training for the vigils, new rules about hearth design and torch carrying. You now need a permit to carry more than 3 lamps after sunset. Do people follow this? Sometimes, especially when the vigils are watching. But what you really notice is how people talk about fire now. It's not just danger, it's history. The word itself, it starts appearing in poems, in speeches, in metaphors for passion, war, politics. Fire isn't just what ruins a home anymore. It's what defines a story. Even the schools catch on. A new genre of public speaking emerges. Oratio, flametha, flame speech. It's dramatic, theatrical, filled with rising tones and smoke references. Kids are judged on their ability to deliver impassioned lines like, "Rome shall rise from cinders and reach again for the stars." They always score extra points for including the phrase tempered by ash. You sit through one of these competitions once. The boy who wins is 10 years old and manages to quote both Cicero and Vulcan in the same sentence. You clap politely. His speech ends with, "And may the fire within us always burn brighter than the fire around us." The crowd weeps. Still, not everything is so literary, because even with all the reforms, arson persists. Extortion never fully disappears. And the vigils, they're better, still human. You hear about one incident near the Trans-Tiberim district. A warehouse catches fire. And while the vigils manage to contain it, they find out it was started by another vigil. Apparently, he wanted to impress his superior with a dramatic save. He gets discharged, then immediately hired by a rich merchant as a fire safety consultant. So yeah, Rome is learning. But slowly, and amid all the lectures and reforms and quotas, you, the ordinary Roman you, keep living cautiously. You check your oil lamp 3 times before bed. You keep your savings near the door. You test your ceiling beams for rot with a stick once a month. You keep your sandals by the threshold. You don't fear fire exactly, but you respect it. You respect its hunger, its indifference, its strange partnership with ambition. Because if there's one thing that hasn't changed, it's this. Every fire in Rome burns for a reason. You may not know what that reason is. You may never find out. But somewhere in the curled smoke, someone is always getting what they wanted. And someone else is sifting through the ash. You're walking home from the baths, and you hear the bells. Not temple bells. Not wedding bells. No, this is the sharp, urgent clang of the fire tower's brass alarm. The sound slices through the late afternoon chatter like a sword through fruit. You stop, water still dripping from your hair, and instinctively scan the skyline. There it is, a dark smear of smoke near the geniculum. You don't panic. Not anymore. It's muscle memory now. You do what everyone else does. Pause, assess the wind direction, and calculate whether tonight will smell like charcoal. It won't. The wind's with you. The danger is far away. Still, you walk a little faster, and as you do, you pass the things that tell you Rome still hasn't quite figured it out. A cart parked too close to a tavern chimney. A brazier left burning beside a wooden stall. A toddler chasing a flaming torch like it's a toy. His father nearby laughing and saying he'll be a great general. Rome has built itself into a city that knows fire intimately. Knowing fire isn't the same as mastering it. That's especially clear when you reach the neighborhood where the alarm was sounded. The streets are packed with spectators. People crowd windows, climb onto stairs, jostle for a better look. The vigils are there, of course, dousing flames, barking orders, occasionally shoving back overeager bystanders with the ends of their water scoops. It's a dye workshop this time. Textiles. Flammable oils, jars of powdered color that now rise into the air in lurid clouds. Pink smoke, purple flames. You stare as violet tongues lick the shutters, turning them into screaming blue ashdot. And through it all, the owner Gaius something's on his knees, wailing in a tone that's equal parts grief and embarrassment. He's been fined before for poor storage. He knew better. But knowing better, as you've come to understand, rarely saves anyone in this city. Historians still debate whether Rome's endless. Flirtation with fire was a failure of policy or an inevitability of scale. Maybe a bit of both. Some argue that fire kept Rome honest, that without the occasional reset, the city would have grown too bloated, too proud, too unchanged. Others say fire was Rome's shadow, always there, always hungry. It's always ready to remind everyone who's really in charge. Quirky fact. There's now a traveling fire oracle, a blind ex-gladiator named Maxima, who claims to dream of future blazes. People pay to have her wave her hands over their doorways and mutter cryptic phrases like ash in the third beam or the lamp will weep near Saturnalia. She's wildly popular, especially among the newly rich. You even considered hiring her once? But she said your home smelled too quiet to trust and left without explanation anyway. Back to the present. The fire is out within an hour. The building, though charred, still stands. The vigil's chalk. A symbol on the wall safe. Enough and move on. The crowd disperses. And Gaius, he starts making plans. A rebuild, of course. Add stone columns. Widen the entrances. Tell everyone the new workshop is certified flameless, which means absolutely nothing but sounds impressive. It's what people do here. They fall down in flames. Then they rise in smoke. Sell tickets to the view. You keep walking, shoes soft against the ash-dusted paving stones. You pass children playing a game called Burn the Forum, where they take turns pretending to be Nero, Crassus, or a Vigilist trying to bribe his way out of trouble. The rules are complicated. The stakes are imaginary. The laughter is real. And in the distance, another bell tolls. Not a fire alarm this time, but the evening signal from the Temple of Janus. You glance at the sky, feel the breeze shift, and take the long route home, away from the wind-swept roofs, and toward the flatter, safer lanes where your favorite fig vendor always leaves a lamp burning just a little too close to his crates. It's strange. It's a blend of danger and routine. Rome doesn't fear fire anymore. Not really. It lives with it, sleeps with it, flirts with it in the alleys, and feeds it breadcrumbs in the markets. Fire is just part of the city's rhythm now. A punctuation mark at the end of unlucky sentences, eh? Bargaining chip in backroom deals. A whispered name in the spaces between prayers. You arrive home and check your walls. The beams are dry, too dry. You make a mental note to splash water along the ceiling tomorrow, just in case. You set your sandals neatly by the door. You place your water jar within reach. You murmur a few words to Fumina. Even though you're not superstitious, it's just habit. And as you climb into your cot, the warmth of the fire tower's bell still echoing in your bones, you wonder what future historians will say about you, about this era, Will they laugh? Pity you? Marvel at your stubbornness? Or will they recognize something familiar? Is that all cities, great and fragile and full of hungry people, burn eventually, not because they fail, but because they try too hard not to? You wake to silence. No bells, no shouting. Just the soft rattle of wind against your shutters and the distant clink of amphorae being moved somewhere down the street. You stretch, legs stiff from sleep, arms reaching toward a ceiling you still don't entirely trust. The morning light spills in, golden and warm, illuminating the patterns in your walls. Stonework the parts that haven't been blackened anyway. Another day in Rome, another day not on fire. You count that as a win. Outside, the city hums. Vendors hawk fresh bread. A boy chases his pet lizard down an alley. A pair of senators argue half-heartedly in front of a mosaic bathhouse about public funding for water barrels. Life, despite everything, keeps rolling forward, and it's in these quiet, in-between moments that you realize something. Fire hasn't just shaped Rome's buildings, it's shaped Rome's people. You walk through the forum and watch a crowd gather near a burned-out insula. It collapsed weeks ago, but the rubble's still warm in everyone's minds. Children dare each other to peek inside. A poet reads a dramatic verse called Ashes of Ambition. A fruit seller mutters, "They shouldn't have built so close to the bakery." Then someone else adds, "They shouldn't have built at all." Because now, finally, people are talking not just about how to stop fires, but why they keep happening. There's a shift, small but steady. Philosophers debate the ethics of risk. Property owners begin attending public safety lectures. The Senate creates a subcommittee to study the psychology of urban combustion, which sounds ridiculous. But surprisingly, people listen. Historians still argue whether this counts as a cultural awakening or just bureaucratic theater. But you know the truth. It's both. This is Rome. Everything is a performance. And everything still leaves ash behind. One quirky detail from recent days. A playwright debuts a tragicomedy called The Fire Within, featuring a corrupt vigilist who starts fires to make himself a hero. The twist? He accidentally saves the city. The audience roars with laughter. And afterward, they check their own roof beams before bed. You begin to realize that Rome doesn't just fear fire anymore. It coexists with it, adapts around it, turns it into story, song, legislation, comedy. There's even a new public holiday forming, Ember Day, where citizens light controlled flames in open courtyards, symbolically burning scrolls of their regrets. They eat blackened bread, tell fire stories. Some laugh, some cry. One year, a man proposes marriage by hiding a ring inside a small flame-proof urn. It becomes a trend, and through it all, the vigils remain a fixture. Still imperfect, still occasionally bribable. Also braver than they used to be. One young recruit, just 17, drags 2 women out of a collapsing insula and becomes a local legend. They nickname him Lucius Sparks, and someone carves his likeness into a street wall with the caption, "Not all heroes wear togas." Chuckle every time you walk past. And what about you? You still keep your emergency bag near the door? Go. Still water your rooftop tiles once a week? Still listen for bells in your sleep. But you've stopped expecting disaster. It's not because you think. It won't come, but because now you know what to do when it does. Fire doesn't scare you anymore. It keeps you alert, awake, human. Because that's the secret, no one tells you. Rome's greatness didn't come from its marble or laws or armies. It came from its capacity to rebuild. Not once, not twice. Always it is a city of smoke-colored resilience. A place where ashes are just gray beginnings. And as you sit down on your stoop, morning bread in hand, watching a neighbor repaint his shop after a minor flare-up last week, you think maybe Rome was never afraid of fire at all. Maybe it just needed to learn how to burn better. Word count. 1,100 to wind down 300 words, and now, with Rome gently flickering in the background of your mind, let the fire fade. The flames that once roared through alleyways and curled around insula, beams grow dimmer, smaller, glowing softly now, like embers in a quiet hearth. The bustle of the forum fades too. the echo of wooden sandals against stone, the distant jingle of a vigil's equipment, the murmur of a city always halfway between rebuilding and forgetting. Let them all drift away, like smoke rising lazily into a windless sky. You're safe now. Fire's gone. The stones beneath your feet are cool. The city sleeps, and so can you. As the last candle burns low, feel your breath settle. Longer, slower. Each exhale like the gentle extinguishing of a tiny flame. No rush, no fear. Just the warm comfort of knowing that tomorrow, like Rome, will rise again. Maybe slightly scorched around the edges, but whole. Still standing, let the ash fall where it may. The fire kept you alert. Now let the quiet keep you grounded. Your story, like Rome's, is not finished. For tonight, it can pause. Sleep well, dear listener. Dream of stone streets and sunrise on rooftops. And remember, you don't need to outrun the fire. You only need to rise from it.